Now I'm going to tell you about my early illustrious or non-illustrious career as a scout. I was a scout starting, I was 11 years old, and I was a scout through the start of the 9th grade when I moved, and I didn't rejoin a troop then because it wasn't cool to be a scout at that point. But I absolutely loved my scouting experience. I had the best scoutmaster and assistant scoutmasters in the world and a great troop. We actually were sponsored by, I believe it was the Lutheran Church, but religion wasn't pushed. You know, it was just anybody wanted to come. And Jesse and David and Ray Al, all those guys were all in the scout troop, so the whole neighborhood was in on it together. And we had a really good time. I made it all the way to second class scout, simply because I could never pass a first class swimming test. And I finally did pass a first class swimming test my last year at camp. And the problem was I couldn't swim my head on top of the water. So I finally asked them, I said, can I swim the course underwater? And they said, well, yeah. So I swam underwater, popped it twice for a breath, and treaded water while I breathed, and then went back under. Swam it, it was in a river, swam it underwater, and passed.
Nice.
But anyway, we used to go to a camp up in the Ozarks called Camp Kayakima. Kayakima was a really neat camp. There was actually 2 camps. There was an old camp and a new camp. First 3 or 4 years I went to the old camp, which was the one that was the best. We had our own campsite we always went to. We reserved it. We'd go up there for a week. The only thing about Kayakima is it was the Ozarks, the only place in the nation where all 4 types of poisonous snakes are found. Water moccasins, rattlesnakes, copperheads, and coral snakes. And full of ticks and other unsavory characters. So there was lots of snakes and stuff. In fact, I remember stepping on a copperhead one night on the way to the trading post. Scared me and the copperhead both. Fortunately, he didn't bite me, but we quickly dispatched the snakes. There was one less copperhead in the world, which means there was probably 10 more crawled out to take his place. I remember that's where I first learned of Order of the Arrow. Now, I actually joined Order of the Arrow as an adult here in Utah as a varsity scout leader. Back then, what they used to do is the Order of the Arrow members dressed as Indians, and you had your elections during the year, and you had to be, I think you had to be first class or something to be in Order of the Arrow. It was something like that. You had to be pretty good rank. I wasn't eligible, probably wouldn't have been elected anyway. Your troop actually elects you to be in Order of the Arrow. And what they did is these guys would come up. We have a big campfire, a big semicircle, and there were rows of scouts, like a kind of mini auditorium. It was outside on wooden benches. These Indians would come up, guys dressed as Indians, and they had really good costumes, not the cheap store-bought costumes. These were handmade, and they were good, and they looked fearsome. And these are all explorer-age scouts. So we were just baby scouts, 11, 12, 13 years old, so they scared us. But what they would do is talk about a little bit about Order of the Arrow, and they were going to do what's called a tapping out. And then what they would do is they would scatter throughout the crowd, and they all wore bells on their moccasins. So when they walk, you hear it's ka-ching, 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 and they walk behind you, and they would almost stomp, ka-ching, 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 and then they'd stop, ka-ching, ka-ching, and then they'd grab somebody, and they would grab them by the shoulders and jerk them up. I mean, it was violent, just jerk them up, and just kind of like roughhouse them up to the front, up to the stage. And then they ka-ching, ka-ching, go by you again, and they always went behind your back. They'd always get the guy in front of them, and they would walk down the rows, and they'd just stop all of a sudden and grab a guy and carry him up front, and they'd probably get 10 or 11, 12 guys. But you're like, oh, he just gets me, he's going to kill me. But then they would actually have the Order of the Arrow ordeal there at camp, which was kind of nice. It took about 2 days. See, we had our tapping out was totally different. It wasn't at a campfire, it wasn't at a camp or anything. Our ordeal was totally separate out here, which I kind of like the way they did it back there a little bit better. But the organized camps back there were different than they do here. We had things like we would go shoot 22 rifles, we'd shoot skeet, we'd shoot archery and arrows, we would throw tomahawks, we'd learn how to classify birds, or they'd show us bats. We have a snake class. There's all kinds of things like that. They'd show you in nature class. We would identify leaves. We have a class on identifying trees and leaves for bark or stuff like that. And so I thought they were quite interesting. Then we'd have classes on safety, first aid. We'd have classes on if you wanted to learn how to cook, on fire building. We used to have and then in the last I think the Saturday or Friday before we had a competition, before we left on Saturday, where you would get teams from your troop. You have fire building where you have to burn 2 strings through. You get 1 match or 2 matches and kindling, and you had to put together, couldn't using artificial fire starters. You had to build a fire, and the first one to burn the strings won. And have relay races and 3-legged races and 22 shooting and skeet shooting, and it's all kinds of competition. You pick 1 or 2 guys in your troop to compete for your troop. So and you probably have 10, 15 troops there. We used to eat our meals in the mess hall, which was a blast. I mean, instead of cooking in our camp and wasting all that time cooking, we'd go eat in the mess hall. And the food was just, I mean, it's average mess hall food, but it was fun to eat with all the other scouts there. And you would have guys on KP duty, and one day you all had, everybody served at least one day on KP duty where you go in and clean the tables off and set the water out, the Kool-Aid, or this, that, or the other. And it was actually quite fun. And I actually prefer camps now that have the community meals like that. I think it's a lot better. And we always had an overnight camp one night where they would give you food and you go take it and cook it, out in camp, out from your base camp somewhere. And our base camps, we had wooden platforms, which is good because of all the snakes and stuff. Platforms were about this high, and then they had the tents, like straight wall tents, army tents there, and 2 cots inside each tent. And we used to do fun things to each other, like we used to tie string all over somebody's inside of their tent while they were asleep, so if they got up they had all the string and stuff. We used to put shaving cream in their hand and tickle their nose so they'd splat themselves in the face, and draw markers on them and draw on their feet. We used to just, with each other, we'd raid each other's tent and do stuff like that to each other at night. So it was a lot of fun. We had campfires almost every night where you all go out after it got dark, which is probably about 9 o'clock. You go out and have a big campfire, and then you go back and go to bed after campfire. But we'd usually have s'mores or something like that, or toast marshmallows at our base camp before we went to bed. So just a lot of fun. And the Scoutmasters were actually absolutely terrific. Several of the Scoutmasters were military guys. I remember one guy we had was a Master Sergeant in the Marine Corps named MacArthur, and he was great. He was great. And they would get some of the young guys from the base up there to come out and be Assistant Scoutmasters for us sometimes. So I had constant turnover of Assistant Scoutmasters as the guys who rotated in and out of the base. And then my actual Scoutmaster worked, I believe, for DuPont. But he had been there for a long time, and he had boys that go through the program and stuff, and he was really good. But scouting was a lot of fun. The one reason I wanted to pass the first class swimming test is we always took an overnight on a canoe also. And to go on the overnight canoe trip, we had to be able to pass the first class swimming test. Well, I could go canoe, and I was a good canoeer, but I couldn't pass the test. To my last year, I finally passed the test and got to go on the overnight canoe ride, which was always a hoot. Because I'd have to go stay with another troop when they would go, because there's only 1 or 2 of us that would stay back, ones that hadn't passed the swimming test. Which was crazy because I was actually very good underwater. I mean, I've been swimming for years underwater and could swim the length of an Olympic-sized pool in the water without even getting a breath. But I could not pass my head above the water. This day, I can swim now with my head above the water, but I can't do the breathing where you put your head in the water and turn sideways and stuff. I have to have my head totally out of the water. And I don't kick very well, but I've got pretty powerful overhand stroke, so I can swim actually pretty fast. But it's kind of a self-taught method. Underwater used to be great. We used to go up to Millington. MacArthur would get us on the base. They had a big pool up there. Did their survival training. We'd go up there once a month. And we had this little game we played where you would dive for a rubber plug. They had a big rubber plug, like a big drain plug. And they'd throw it across the pool, and you have to dive in underwater, go retrieve it, and go back to the wall underwater. And it didn't matter how far they threw it, pretty much I could always go get it and bring it back. So that was a lot of fun. Now, we used to play one game we call Submarines and Destroyers. And everybody was submarines but one guy. He was a destroyer, and he had probably 6 or 7 of these rubber plugs. What he would try to do is throw them out in the pool as you're swimming back and forth underwater, and they were depth charges. If they hit you, you exploded. You had to come up. And it was actually quite fun, because you're swimming in the water and he's throwing. You can't see where he's throwing because he's on the surface on the side of the pool. You're swimming this way, he's running back and forth, throwing plugs in. He's got to throw them right so they come down, because they don't sink that fast. He'll come down and hit you as you go by. So he's got to have the azimuth and the depth right too, the timing right. So it was actually kind of hard to do. But if you have a bunch of guys out there, you'd always hit 1 or 2. So we played Submarines and Destroyers. That's a fun game even today if you can get some rubber plugs, get somebody that's willing to swim underwater. Um, Scouting was where I got my start learning how to tie knots and ropes, which has stood me to this day. It's taught me how to identify tree leaves, give me an interest in nature, a very big interest in nature and camping and stuff like that. And I attribute that all to my scoutmasters. We used to have what are called pup tents, but what they were is really they weren't a tent, they were shelter halves. They were old Marine Corps stock that had been donated to the public. And what they were 1/2 of a tent. And each guy carried 1/2 a tent with him. And we each carried a tent pole. We put the tent poles up, and each half the tent would slip over the top of the tent poles with little grommets. And they used to leak like a sieve, these things did. Oh, they were terrible. So we used to bring plastic and put plastic underneath and go fold up inside the tent. Because back east it used to rain quite a bit. Most of our campouts it would rain on. And then you would dig a little ditch around it. And it's not environmentally sound to dig a ditch around it. We dig a little ditch around it. So you had to kind of figure out where the water was going to come from when it ran downhill and dig a ditch so it diverted around your tent. Because if you didn't, you could wake up in the middle of the night, 1/2 inch of water, which I've done before. Not very comfortable and very cold. But we used to go camping once a month. Rain or shine, snow, good weather, didn't make any difference. The only month we didn't go camping was the month when we went to summer camp, which is usually July. And we go to summer camp for a week. And I got to admit, my scoutmasters were very dedicated, and they were always there and always take us camping. And my scoutmaster used to have his wife make up what we call full dinners for our first evening there, because we get there kind of late, probably 7, 8 o'clock. It used to be dark. We'd set our tents up. We'd make a fire and get some good bit of coals going, and then we would take these packets, have a piece of hamburger, some cut up carrots, and sliced potatoes in it. And you would put it in the foil and cook it for about 15, 20 minutes on one side, turn it to the other and cook it, open it up and have a full dinner. And they were great. I remember my scoutmaster one night, we were having full dinners. And I think it was actually the Marine guy that did this. He dug him a little pit about this deep and about that long. Put some wood in it, got some coals going, and then he took some tinfoil out of his backpack, and he took some sticks about this long, about this big around. He wrapped the tinfoil around 3 sticks, and he kind of pushed them in the ground so they were over the bed of coals. And he pulls out this nice big steak, and we're at about that time we're eating our little hamburger dinners. Pulls this nice big steak out and lays it across that man-made grill. See, the aluminum foil kept the wood from burning. It was like a grill. I mean, he grilled him a steak. We were so jealous. So I was so jealous of that. I did that to my scouts here one time. I had them hamburger dinners, and I pulled the steak out and made a grill just like that. Oh, that was fun though. But I had a lot of good friends in scouting, and we all had a good time. It didn't matter what your rank was or who you were. We just everybody got along pretty well. We enjoyed a lot of things together.